Hi everyone, today's video is going to be my build for the ARII Everything group build hosted by the Herbert Erpaderp Discord group. They usually build military vehicles and they usually do a monthly group build. So the theme for this is to build a vehicle with ARII or to add ARII to a vehicle that wouldn't normally have it. And for those who don't know what ARII is, it's explosive reactionary armour. Pretty much it's put on tanks and other armoured fighting vehicles, and it's kind of like anti-tank defence. Basically, whatever rocket hits it, it explodes and it kind of diverts the blast away from the vehicle. So I went with this 132 scale ARII, I think I'm pronouncing it right, 1958 Mazda K360, which is a little three-wheel truck. And I thought this would make a really funny kind of technical or fighting vehicle, as they're mostly known. You know, think Toyota Hilux with a machine gun mounted on the top. Anyway, let's have a quick look inside the box. So there's not that many parts to this build, although there's quite a few little tiny pieces which might be problematic later on. So start with the chassis and glue the rear axle and drive shaft assembly into place. Next I add these, which I assume are like a fuel line and a brake line. I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I think they are. These are a little tricky to get in place, but luckily I'm using some poly cement, which will allow me some time to kind of get these in the right place before the glue starts to set. After this I attach the front wheel to the front forks, just simply slotting them over the top. So this is a little difficult because I'm trying not to use too much pressure because I don't want to break these. Which is going to be problematic later when I've got to take this apart to paint it. Then attach this to the chassis. Following this, I glue the end of the exhaust on, as well as the number plate holder. Now comes the tricky part. Like a lot of my build, I built this with the intention of using in future animations. Obviously the doors don't open on this, so I'm going to have to cut them so that I can make hinges and they will open. So to do this, I take my hobby knife and carefully score around the door. And you have to do this multiple times, and it's very time consuming to do this. You've got to be doing it very carefully. Otherwise, if you use too much pressure, you could easily slip and cut yourself or damage the model. Unfortunately, like I've said, I used a little too much pressure when I've cut one of the doors off, and I've cut the lower section off below the door. So now I have to repair this. It's simple enough, I just glue this back in place. Next, to make a start in the interior, starting with the handbrake. And then with the gear stick. After this, I glue the seats in. Then I glue the steering wheel to the dash. And then I glue the dash in place. Back to the body, I glue on the front bumpers, at least I think the front bumpers. I then glue the back of the cab to the body. Next, add the side mirrors. And after this, I glue on the single windshield wiper. Inside I had the rear view mirror. I then add this rack-like piece to the bed. And then test fit the canvas section, which seems to not fit well with it, so I'll have to fix this later. Hopefully it's just because the glue hasn't set yet and so it's just nudging it. So off camera I made a hinge for one of the doors so I could figure things out at my own level without having to record a bunch of footage that I was just going to scrap. And now I know what I'm doing, I can kind of take you through a step-by-step process of how I made the hinge. So I do wish I had some smaller styrene tube and some styrene rod to do this, but I was just using what I had at hand. Otherwise it would have looked a little bit better. So the first thing I need to do is remove the hinges which are already moulded into the door and the body. I do this using my hobby knife and just cut them off and then smooth down the surface using the edge of my blade, just scraping off layer by layer so it's nice and flat and smooth. I also do this to the door off camera. Then I measure and cut some styrene rod for the inner part of the hinge. I then do the same with some styrene tube. I then glue the piece of rod to one of the pieces of styrene tube to make the hinge. After this has had some time to set, I then tape the door in place and then assemble the hinge fully and place it over the top of the door, which unfortunately falls off here and I have to fiddle around and get it back in place. I then very carefully glue the lower section of the hinge to the body. Try not to use too much glue because otherwise I'll end up gluing the door in place and I'll have to tear everything apart and do more damage than good. Once that has had time to set, I come back and then glue the upper half of the hinge to the door. Next I measure and cut some more styrene to reinforce the hinges. This will help prevent the doors from breaking off from use when I'm opening and closing them during animations and such. With the doors done, I can now move on to the gun. So after looking through my collection of bits and pieces, I ended up going with this off-brand Lego Dishka. Which I've pilferaged from one of these not a Lego Humvees, which have two configurations, like a military version and an off-road version, as you can see here. And since the gun's not in use in the off-road version, I thought I could make better use of it here. Plus, whenever I get around to using these in an animation, I'll probably use some brick arm 50 cals, because obviously Humvees don't really have Dishkas, they have American weapons. So initially I did think about mounting this to the roof, just because it'll leave more of the bed open for the gunner. So I decided to move the gun a bit further back, which luckily there's still plenty of room for the gunner. But this way I can put the canvas on and it can kind of go in like a stealth mode with no gun on and just have the canvas on the back, although it will look a bit suspicious with the ARII on the side of it, so you know, but from a distance it would probably look okay. So I marked out and cut some styrene tube for the gun mount. As you can see here, the gun will be fixed on this little shelf behind the cab. Following this, I cut and measured a base plate. Measuring and cutting a larger piece of styrene tube for where the gun will be mounted. And then combine these two. I also cut some styrene rod to make some rivets and then attach these rivets. And with this built, I attach it to the little shelf behind the cab. And as you can see here, the gun will mount nicely. Will still allow me to remove the gun and add the canvas back. Next, I hollow out the tip of the barrel using my hobby knife, like so. After this, I find I have a problem with the rear wheels. Unlike most model kits where the wheels will just clip on and then free roll, these I think are meant to be glued in place, which again is going to be a problem for me if I'm going to use this in an animation. I'd really prefer the wheels to be able to rotate. So I've come up with this idea of making a wheel guard, which is just to keep the wheel in place, like so. So then mark out and cut some of this styrene. And then glue this over the wheel arch, followed by cutting some styrene rod for the rivets and then gluing them on. With that done, I can then move on to the ARII armour, which you can see I've done on this side already. So to make this, I cut up some square pattern styrene. Now I deliberately cut these into odd shapes because I want this to look like it's been salvaged from multiple wrecked armoured vehicles, because obviously it's going to be a post-apocalyptic vehicle. It's going to be built from whatever people can scavenge. So here's just an example of how I'm just gluing it here and there and just slowly adding bit by bit. And I'll just do the rest off camera. Next, since the kit didn't really come with some door cards for the inside of the doors and there's no detail, I've made my own. I'm just going to show you how I made this. So I cut some square styrene rod as well as some circle styrene rod, and then using the door I've already made as a guide, I mark out where the door handle and window winder should go. And then simply glue these in place, piece by piece. After this, I make a start on the armoured windshield cover. For this I'm using some angle shaped styrene, cutting this into pieces to make a rectangle, which I then glue together. I then cut out some square styrene rod for the mounting brackets, which I then glue in the corners. Following this, I add some mesh, tracing around the frame and then cutting it out. Then just trimming it down and super gluing it in place. Moving on to the painting. Now I start by painting the roof with some Revell matte white. I also paint the wheels this colour too. I then use some Revell Luftwaffe yellow to paint the lower section of the body, as well as the chassis. Next I use some Revell sandy yellow on the canvas. To add to the post-apocalyptic feel and just piece together look, I paint one of the doors with some Revell light blue. I then put down a base coat of Revell rust on the mechanical parts on the chassis. I also use this on the front forks and the windshield cover and gun mount. Following this, I start painting the armour, first using some Revell sandy yellow, then some Revell olive green, and then finally some Revell metallic steel. Next I paint the seats using some Revell stone grey. I use some Revell matte black to paint the handbrake, gear shift and steering wheel. I then put down another base coat of Revell rust onto the exposed metal parts on the body. Moving back to the chassis, I dry brush on some Revell matte black onto the front forks, as well as the leaf springs and the rear axle. I then use some Revell metallic silver and paint the fuel tank, a number plate holder, and then dry brush this onto the transmission. After this, I use some Revell Bronze onto the lines and the exhaust. I use some Revell Olive Green on the ammo can for the gun. For the gun, I first sponge chipped on some Revell Metallic Silver, which I also did for the body. Going back to the gun, I then did the same with some Revell Rust, and again did the same again for the body. And then I dry brush on some Revell Metallic Silver onto the exposed metal parts to give them that rusty look. Now at this point I was kind of running out of time, so I just stopped recording just because I wanted to get this thing done before the deadline. So I was going to give you a quick recap of what I did off camera. So first I repainted the ARII because I just felt it didn't look that good with all the different colours. So I just base coated it rust and then went over it with the dry brushing of olive to kind of give it that weathered look. I also added some homemade black wash over the entire model. And finally I then added the armoured windshield cover, the windows and the headlights. I also removed the rack at the back because it was interfering with me being able to put the canvas back on and off. So I just got rid of it. Now I did rush the painting, and unfortunately because I rushed it I missed a few spots which you can't really see, but if you look on the mirror you can kind of see there's some white spots on the chassis, which was a bit of a mistake, but hey, what you're going to do was rushing this thing. Other than that though, I was quite happy with the way this turned out because I just wanted to make some kind of goofy technical, which ironically with the size of that gun it would just fall over if you try to fire that thing. Anyway, I am looking forward to using this in some other future animations as well. As usual, please stick around for the glamour shots and the short little animation. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.